Should an 18-year-old today still go to college? And if so, what should they study?
Steve Jobs once said that he worked every day at the intersection of engineering and the liberal arts.
Microsoft is the fourth most valuable company in the world. It slipped from the top 3 because of NVIDIA's surge. I'm sitting down with its president, Brad Smith, to figure out how we should be thinking about education, jobs, and artificial intelligence disrupting everything we ever knew.
How do we use AI to think more? Trustworthy AI is what is fundamental. It's almost existential to the industry's long-term success. You're not going to use AI if you don't trust it.
This is What's Uptin with Microsoft President Brad Smith.
Brad Smith, thanks so much for sitting down with me here at Web Summit.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, so first question here. Microsoft invested in OpenAI back in 2019. What did you see in OpenAI at a time where most people hadn't even heard of it?
Satya Nadella, our CEO, had this intuition, and he asked Kevin Scott, one of our most senior people, to go spend time with them. But the intuition that Satya had was that the large language model approach that OpenAI was taking and its scaling approach might just be the secret to bringing AI to life in a much bigger way. And the intuition was based on, I think, a very interesting insight. Satya said, in a way, language is software for the brain. The brain is the hardware. Language became the software. If you could replicate everything that one can do with language, you might unlock the potential of artificial intelligence. Now, obviously, there's a lot more complexity that has emerged, but I think as we look back 6 years later, that insight is at the heart of everything.
And OpenAI was the company to lead that?
Absolutely. I mean, we knew, and Satya knew Sam Altman, and when Kevin Scott, our senior engineer, went over and spent time, he looked at what they were doing. He came back to Satya and he said, I think these guys are on the right track.
Now, fast forward to today, a lot of your ecosystem is powered by OpenAI. How do you draw the line between partnership versus dependency?
Well, in a sense, it's been an evolving relationship for both of us and for everybody in the ecosystem. OpenAI and Microsoft are critical partners. We enormously value that partnership with OpenAI. But what started out as sort of more symbiotic and exclusive is much more varied today. OpenAI works with other companies for infrastructure. Microsoft works with other companies for models. We're developing our own as well. OpenAI is going to build its own infrastructure, and we collaborate in a wider variety of areas, and we compete as well. And that was always part of the original plan. Our agreements were written to reflect that. And I think you're just going to see this kind of collaboration and competition, not just between Microsoft and OpenAI, but between a number of different companies in the AI sector.
Microsoft announced over 15,000 layoffs this year. How do you respond to people like Andrew Yang who say this is the beginning of the end and these jobs are not coming back?
Well, I think it's way too early to jump to that conclusion. What Microsoft did and what some other tech companies have done, but let me just speak for Microsoft, was we eliminated 15,000 jobs in one area, and then we created a comparable number in other areas. So the total employment level didn't necessarily change. And I think Andrew Yang's comment goes more to that. Now, I do think that we've learned from this year, and I think the fundamental learning for us is something we need to apply not just in Microsoft, but it's probably a question that is more societally relevant. If some jobs go away and other jobs get created, how do we help people move from one thing to the next? And this is where we're now focused as a company. It's an easy problem to describe. It's a harder challenge to solve. I do think that it requires several things. At its heart is just more skilling, more work to equip people so they can do new things. And that in part involves AI skills, but there's a lot of other skills as well. I also think it really requires more forecasting. longer term efforts. So we have a sense of what are the new areas where we're going to need people so we can work with our employees and help them make that transition.
And you can use LinkedIn, right, for a lot of that data.
Absolutely. Because LinkedIn's part of Microsoft, we can use that, in ways that we should. I mean, if anybody's using LinkedIn, it should be Microsoft. We are. And I think LinkedIn has become just this extraordinary resource for the world in matching people who are seeking jobs with the jobs that need to be filled, but not just the jobs, the skills and the ability to turn those skills into credentials so that they're obvious to future employers. So absolutely, LinkedIn is important.
Should an 18-year-old today still go to college? And if so, what should they study?
Well, I don't think that there's a single answer that is right for every 18-year-old. My kids are a little older than 18, but if they were 18, I would advise them go to college. I would say learn a combination of computer science and engineering and liberal arts. And think about what combination is right for you. It's not the same combination for everyone, but everyone should have a good dose of both.
And why liberal arts?
Well, think about the role that AI is playing in the world. It's so societally impactful. In the future, it's not just about learning to code. It's not just learning about, say, AI systems. It's really becoming familiar with the ethics of AI, the societal impact of AI, the economic effect, the sociological effect. I think one way to learn about all of that is to have the benefit of studying history, to have some grounding even in the humanities and philosophy. Steve Jobs once said that he worked every day at the intersection of engineering and the liberal arts. I think part of what has made Microsoft a success for so many decades is we bring together that variety of disciplines. There are days when I'm one of the champions of the liberal arts side of this, and I interact with great engineering leaders. I am so thankful that our engineering leaders, starting with Satya, but everybody actually has this broad set of interests. That, I think, is at the essence of what is required to make sure that AI serves people.
Should governments be thinking about universal basic income as a result of AI?
I'm skeptical myself that that kind of solution will outperform the market. If it does, it means because we're going to see a market that collapses. I would much rather see the same market forces that have created prosperity for now 250 years in an admittedly imperfect way continue to be harnessed. What I think the future requires is real public-private partnerships. Where is the market working? How can government help make it work better? How does regulation make sure that we avoid excesses? How does government fill in the gaps for people who do risk being left behind? But universal basic income is something that may fit, but probably, in my view, less so than these other more targeted efforts.
Are governments taking the appropriate action right now when it comes to regulation of artificial intelligence?
Well, there's a debate going on. Has Europe gone too far? Is the U.S. going to pull back too much? Where is the balance that needs to be struck? I do think there is a balance that will be needed, and it will be struck over time. But in the meantime, if you're in the AI sector, the question or thought I would leave with everyone is this: you don't need a law to give you permission to do what you think is right. Even if there's less regulation, I don't believe that we should all abandon the field of responsible AI, ethical AI, because I believe that trustworthy AI is what is fundamental. It's almost existential to the industry's long-term success. You're not going to use AI if you don't trust it. And you're not going to be able to trust it if the companies that build it don't think hard about how to do this in a disciplined way. And thank goodness we and many companies are. That is moving forward, even while regulatory debate, political debate, has become somewhat more expansive and intense over the last year.
Absolutely. Your new AI diffusion report shows that AI hit 1 billion users faster than anything in history in terms of technology. What comes next?
Well, the first thing I think we should recognize is that AI is accelerating, but gaps are opening up. We're approaching the 3-year anniversary of the launch of ChatGPT. So 3 years into what I think we should regard as a many decades process of expanding the use of AI around the world, there are two things that are sobering. One is the growing gap between the global north and the global south. So, you see the EU, you see the US, hovering around 30% of the population using AI. You see the UAE and Singapore at almost double that. But you see most of Africa in single digits. And there's an understandable reason. They lack electricity, they lack access to the internet and connectivity, they lack access to digital skills. If we don't close those gaps, then this is going to exacerbate the divide between the global north and the global south. And there's one other divide that's opening up as well, between urban communities and rural communities. We see that here in Portugal. We see it in my home state of Washington. We see it as a pretty universal element. AI is taking off as other accelerants of economic activity have over the last 2 decades in some areas, but not in others, even within a state, even within a country. These are the two issues that I think we need to start to talk about, think about, and develop plans to address.
Final question. You just came back from the UAE. Microsoft invested $15 billion. Why the UAE?
Well, in some ways, it's reflected in that data point. Right now, when we look at the AI leaderboard for countries around the world, the UAE is at the top. And of course, people start with things like access to cheap energy, not just, say, natural gas, but some of the world's largest solar plants as well. I think the number one thing that has driven this growth in the UAE is broad adoption. It was the first country to have an AI minister. And the first thing the AI minister did was say, let's skill the government and let's get the government using AI to provide better public services.
It's a mandate, right?
It comes from the top, but it's really, I think, almost now part of the culture of the country. When I was in Abu Dhabi last week, the two things that excited me the most were probably this. One, the Department of Health has a command center using AI built on Microsoft Azure. If you have to call an ambulance in Abu Dhabi, you're going to get routed and your ambulance drivers are going to take you to the hospital that has the fastest drive, the best availability of doctors to help you as soon as you go in, the available hospital beds for your category of illness. And then there's another service called TAM, T-A-M-M. It's Arabic for consider it done. Every city in the world has potholes. Abu Dhabi is the one city where anybody who sees a pothole can take out their TAM app, use their phone, take a photograph, upload it on the app. The geolocation goes with it. It goes to the part of the city government that then is responsible for filling the pothole. When they do that, you will get a message back. But they don't close out the issue until you, as the person who reported it, says, now it's fixed. That, to me, is the kind of benchmark that we should set for every government around the world. Let's use AI to save people's lives, to fill potholes, and address every other citizen service in between. That is why we don't go to Abu Dhabi to raise money, which is what other tech companies do. We go to the UAE to spend it because we're seeing it put to such good use.
Incredible. You said what excites you. What keeps you up at night?
Well, I think to me, the first thing that does keep me up at night is this set of divides, the emerging AI divide, because I think that is something that risks creating a more fractured world. And then we always have to worry about the reality that AI, like every technology ever invented, will be used as both a tool and a weapon. So we do see AI being weaponized to, say, unleash more powerful cyber attacks. We see a lot of questions emerging about what's the right balance. What's the right age for kids to start to use generative AI? How do we make sure that it reinforces and advances mental health and doesn't become a risk factor for it? I would say more broadly, there's a fundamental question for every one of us. How do we use AI to think more, not think less? It can do a lot of work for us fast. I use it that way every day, whether it's taking a look at what I'm writing, The Copilot researcher is my favorite agent because I can go get a briefing memo in 10 or 15 minutes that, in the past I would have to ask people to go work on for a week. I don't stop thinking when I get it. I then ask people more questions. We should all use it as a tool. Think more, think less. Don't just rely on it to do your work for you. Rely on it to help you do your work better. That, to me, I think is going to be the key for all of us in terms of personal growth and success, the ability to pursue better jobs, more successful careers in the years ahead.
Brad, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of What's Uptin, where I bring you inside the minds driving tech, money, and power. Follow along on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow my personal account on Instagram @Uptin. Would love to connect with you.